The morning I discovered my cornfield withering away, I knew instantly who was behind it. The sharp stench of chemicals hung heavy in the air, clinging to the once vibrant green stalks now curling and browning as if struck by an overnight plague. I stood there, staring at the wreckage, anger surging through me. My land, my livelihood, my family's legacy, under siege. This wasn't some random misfortune or natural disaster. No, this was deliberate. This was war. And there was only one person petty, spiteful, and foolish enough to think they could pull it off. Linda. I should have seen it coming the moment Linda took over as HOA president. She'd always viewed my cornfield as a blight on her vision of suburban perfection. My farm predated the HOA by decades. It wasn't just property, it was my heritage. My grandfather had carved this place out of nothing, and I'd be damned if I let some over-perfumed, power-tripping busybody dictate what I could grow. Linda didn't give a damn about history. All she cared about was property values and her obsessive need to micromanage everything within a 5-mile radius of her gaudy McMansion. It started with the letters, those passive-aggressive notes every HOA tyrant masters. Dear homeowner, they'd begin. It has come to our attention that your property disrupts the aesthetic harmony of the community. I ignored them. Then came the fines. She tried to argue my cornfield was an unapproved structure. I laughed in her face, pointing out my land wasn't even under HOA jurisdiction. But Linda didn't deal in facts. She escalated. I'd catch her lurking at the edge of my property, arms folded, lips pursed in disdain. She made it clear she despised my farm, my crops, and most of all, my refusal to bow to her like the rest of the neighborhood. This is supposed to be a respectable community. She'd snapped at me once, her manicured nails tapping her phone as she likely typed up another baseless complaint. People don't want to see this, she'd said, waving at my cornfield like it was a junkyard. I smirked. Maybe they shouldn't have built their identical houses next to a working farm. Her face twisted, and she stormed off, muttering about my uncooperative attitude. I figured she'd tire herself out eventually and move on to harassing someone else. I underestimated how unhinged her HOA obsession could get. The night before I found my field ruined, I'd heard an odd noise outside, a mechanical hum, a faint hiss, like a massive spray can at work. Exhausted from a long day, I brushed it off as the wind and went to bed. Big mistake. The next morning, the truth hit me like a brick. My corn was dying, rows of it poisoned, the stalks drooping lifelessly. Fury burned through me as I ran my hands over the shriveled plants. This was no accident. Someone had doused my field with weed killer, and I knew who. I stormed inside, pulled up my security footage, and there she was, Linda, striding onto my land in the dead of night with an industrial sprayer. She moved through the rows with the smug precision of someone who'd spent years nitpicking neighbors' lawns, soaking my crops like a self-appointed avenger. When she finished, she stood at the property line, arms crossed, admiring her handiwork like she'd just sculpted a masterpiece. My fists clenched until my knuckles whitened. Linda thought she was untouchable, invincible behind her laminated HOA president badge. She had no clue what she'd unleashed. I'm a law-abiding guy, but I know how to play the game. Linda hadn't just trashed my crops. She'd committed agricultural vandalism, a felony here. The fines could ruin her, and with luck, she might even see jail time. I called my friend Tom, an agricultural inspector. When he saw the field, he let out a low whistle. This isn't just vandalism, Mike. This is a felony. She's in deep. Good. That's what I wanted. But I wasn't stopping there. I wanted her to feel the heat. I reported the crime to the police, handing over the footage, then tipped off a couple of local news stations about an HOA president caught sabotaging a farmer's crop. The story spread fast. Local HOA president poisons crops, one headline blared. Suburban control freak targets family farm, read another. The HOA members who'd once trembled under Linda's reign started to panic, not about my farm, but about their precious property values. Nothing sinks real estate faster than a neighborhood scandal. Linda didn't see it coming. The day after I reported her, she strutted around like she'd won some grand victory, even sending me another HOA violation letter claiming my dead cornfield was an unsightly nuisance that needed immediate removal. I grinned. Oh, Linda, you're in for a surprise. That night, I cracked open a beer and watched the chaos I'd ignited unfold. The police were digging in, the news was buzzing, and the HOA board was turning on her. Linda, oblivious, had no idea her little empire of intimidation was about to collapse. The next morning, Tom texted me. Lab results are in, definitely herbicide. You were right. I didn't need the proof, but seeing it fueled my resolve. This wasn't petty sabotage, it was calculated destruction. In our state, that meant serious consequences. I called Tom back. How bad is it? Real bad, he said. The chemical's deep in the soil. That patch is dead for the season. I gritted my teeth. Lost income, lost time, and a mountain of work to fix her mess. All because Linda couldn't stand my corn. I gathered the footage, lab results, and a damage estimate, then drove to the police station. The officer at the desk barely glanced up. What can I do for you? I dropped the folder in front of him. I want to file charges. That got his attention. He skimmed the evidence, photos of my ruined field, the chemical analysis, the video stills, and raised his eyebrows. You're saying someone did this on purpose? I've got video of a woman trespassing and spraying my crops with herbicide, I said. I want her held accountable. He nodded. All right, let's get a report going. By afternoon, 2 patrol cars pulled up to Linda's house. I watched from a distance as officers knocked on her door. When she answered, her arms started flailing, her voice rising in shrill protests. She pointed at my farm, then at the cops, as if that explained everything. They handed her a notice of investigation, and her face turned crimson. She was officially under scrutiny for property destruction and agricultural vandalism, crimes with hefty penalties. I could almost see her scrambling for an escape, but there was none. The neighborhood buzzed. HOA members who'd once feared Linda began whispering behind her back. I heard 3 were already pushing to oust her. That evening, the HOA board emailed me. Linda had tried to convince them I'd staged the whole thing, poisoning my own crops to frame her. They didn't buy it. The next day, I upped the ante, tipping off a news station about an HOA president facing legal trouble. Reporters pounced, and the headlines hit hard. I expected Linda to lose it. I didn't expect her to dig her hole deeper. 2 days later, I found another violation letter in my mailbox, demanding I remove my unsightly, dead cornfield. I laughed until I nearly choked. She was under investigation, her reputation torched, and she was still trying to find me for her own crime. The woman was unraveling. That night, the HOA held an emergency meeting. Linda showed up disheveled, her usual smugness replaced by desperation. I sat in the back as the board turned on her. Abuse of power, one said. Police investigation, another added. We can't have this liability. Linda sputtered. This is absurd. You're all being manipulated by him. He's a troublemaker. Got proof? Someone cut in. She froze. For once, she had no comeback. The vote to remove her was a landslide. Even her former allies abandoned her. She glared at me as she stormed out, hissing, "This isn't over." I smiled. Oh, it is. She didn't stop, though. The next day, my mailbox was smashed, and my truck got a flat tire in my driveway. No proof, but it reeked of Linda's petty vengeance. She still thought she had power. She didn't. The police investigation was picking up steam, and agricultural vandalism wasn't a slap-on-the-wrist offense. It was an attack on a livelihood, and the law didn't mess around. I reminded her of that when I saw her ranting at a board member in their driveway. Heard from the county yet? I called out. They gave me an update this morning. She stiffened, then stormed off, but I saw the fear in her eyes. When the HOA announced her removal, no one mourned. Neighbors started sharing their own Linda horror stories, fines for basketball hoops, threats over car colors, spying from her windows. She'd ruled like a dictator, and her fall exposed it all. Then the fines hit. Between the vandalism charges, damages, and legal fees, she owed nearly $30,000. I heard her scream from across the street when she got the notice, a mix of rage and disbelief. She tried fighting it, but she was drowning. Weeks later, she put her house up for sale, overpriced, desperate. No one bid. So I made an offer, insultingly low. She had no choice but to take it. The day the sale closed, I stood on my porch as she loaded her U-Haul. She glared but said nothing, just drove off. I turned her pristine yard into Linda's Harvest, a farm stand selling my produce. The neighborhood loved it, and the new HOA backed it, eager to erase her legacy. Linda vanished. Rumors said she moved states, tried another HOA gig, and got blacklisted. I didn't care. One evening, locking up the stand and looking at my replanted cornfield, I felt peace. She'd tried to ruin me, but she'd only destroyed herself. The neighborhood was free, and it finally felt like home.